Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so very much for joining us. Interesting, important stuff to talk about today. Is the United States getting ready to go to war with Syria? Is Governor Scott Walker backing away from his pledge to create 250,000 jobs? And we'll talk about Harley Fest and what it means to Milwaukee. Let me introduce everybody. Joel McNally, longtime newspaper columnist. Kevin Fischer, former broadcast journalist, political analyst, and sometimes host over on WISN Talk Radio. You know Denise Callaway, communications and public relations professional. And Gerard Randall, education consultant, local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, let's talk first about Syria. For days now, there have been reports that the U.S. is preparing for a potential military strike against Syria. The reports seem to indicate it will be missiles fired from ships, not bombs dropped from planes or boots on the ground. This would be retaliation for Syrian forces using chemical weapons to kill hundreds, more than 1,000 of their own citizens. I guess the most obvious first question is if this happens, would the Obama administration be taking us into war?
Quite possibly. I mean, and they don't even know. And to me, it's kind of amazing how easily it is to get sucked into war in this modern age. I mean, here you have John Kerry, who was one of the founders of Vietnam Veterans Against the War, who was very instrumental in opposing that conflict. And you have Barack Obama, who's elected to end two wars, not intending to start any more. And even people, of that particular, sensibility and really, I think, good-heartedness, it is so easy to get sucked into these international crises. The idea that, who invented, us as gods to decide, that if one country mistreats its citizens, that we're supposed to intervene and settle all right or punish them for doing something. They're trying to set this up as a limited strike. It would be because they violated this principle of using poison gas, and that this is such an ironclad rule internationally that no one can be allowed to get by with it, except that the international community can't act. The United Nations can't act because they're allies of Syria on the Security Council, mainly Russia, which won't allow the United Nations to act. Some individual nations can get together and maybe act. And for a while, it looked like it was going to be France and Britain and the U.S., but Britain was so fed up with being sucked into the Iraq war that their own citizens have risen up and prevented that government from getting involved. It's scary because it's so easy to get into wars, and it's so hard to get out. We eagerly went to Iraq, and that was the biggest mistake we ever made.
During the campaign, Obama did present Bush as somewhat of a warmonger. Is he finding himself in the same position now?
Well, I think the problem the president has is that they haven't articulated a strategy with regards to Syria. The best that can be said about wanting to go into Syria now is that it's punishment for using chemical weapons against its own citizens. That should be a UN action. The world community needs to be involved in that decision and whatever police action is going to take place.
But it can't.
But well,
it won't. It's not that it won't.
And that's the problem, because I think that undercuts the argument that the administration is trying to make, that it's necessary to go in there. Now, I think one of the things that's hanging in the back of the president's mind is what happened with President Clinton when they didn't go over into Rwanda, but instead they focused on Eastern Europe and the atrocities that were happening there. And so they don't want to be blamed long-term for allowing this kind of horrendous activity to go on without some type of justice being served. The United States shouldn't be alone, though, in meting that justice out. And so I don't think there's a strategy for our going in and getting out and having whatever quick action we're going to take have some kind of lasting consequence. That's the problem the president and his administration faces right now. And unfortunately, if they do go in, they're going to get bogged down into the same mire that previous presidents have been bogged down in.
You know, Denise, how many times have we heard in our lifetimes people saying this is going to be a limited action, it's only going to, you know, last a few days or a few weeks, and then it turns into long term?
Well, I mean, there are certainly occasions where that has happened. I mean, there have been other occasions where we've gone in, Panama, Grenada, amongst others, where it has been exactly what the presidents at that point in time promised that it would be. Very limited engagement, very limited time, and eventually it seems like all of these do tend to in some way, shape, or form, unfortunately end up with boots on the ground. And I think that's the dilemma that the president and his advisors are taking a look at right now. I don't think their challenge is what now. I think they have that figured out and they've been pretty transparent with it, talking about limited targeted strikes from our warships, not bombs dropped from the air. So I think they've been deliberate about that. I think the challenge that they're facing is what's next, because you cannot predict what that regime in Syria is going to do, which is their dilemma. You can't predict what they are. You can't predict what they're going to do as a response. But we also cannot predict what a country that would use chemical weapons against its own citizens will do with those weapons in the rest of the world. If this is what you've decided you need to do to keep your people in check, there is, I think, extreme danger that this is a regime that would not hesitate to use those chemical weapons against other countries. The United States, Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, those countries in that region that are seen to be friendly to us. I think the biggest challenge, France has said that it's going to come in. We're not going to stand alone. Our bigger challenge, and this may be what's taking more time, is to see whether or not any Arab states are willing to join us in this action. Because quite frankly, they're in the bullseye. I think that I do not believe that this administration is going to fail to do something. I don't think it can. We've talked about the fact that, or the president's talked about the fact there's a line in the sand that can't be crossed. Well, they've apparently crossed it in Syria. If we're going to have any street cred in the international community, if we've said this is a line and there's a consequence for it, there has to be.
But it shouldn't be about street cred. I mean, that's the thing. That's where it turns into just a game when lives are being lost. I mean, and believe me, if we attack Syria, we aren't just going to get some bad guys. We're going to get civilians. We're going to get innocent people as well.
Is it good military strategy, Kevin, to say, here's what we're going to do repeatedly? Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do. Get ready.
No, and that's another problem. The president, who I empathize with, as President Bush said today, it's the most difficult decision a president has to make, sending American soldiers into harm's way. He's intimating, President Obama is, that he's going to do something, and it's almost like he's telegraphing. So that's not a smart strategy. If he's going to do something just to do something, I think that's wrong. If you're going to do something, go in there, take out their military strength, which is their Air Force. Nothing short of eliminating their current regime, I think would be smart. I think he has to tread very carefully, the president. He hasn't made the case yet of why it would be a good idea to go in there and intervene militarily in Syria. He hasn't convinced Congress. He hasn't convinced the American people. Say what you want about Iraq and Afghanistan, you at least had congressional support early on. You had many, many allies. Here, he doesn't have any allies, and I don't think he has the support of Congress, and he certainly doesn't have the support of the American people. So I would vote that unless you're really going to go in there and do some real damage and change that regime and take out their military Air Force, it's a tough case. It's a civil war, and even if we go in and do something, I don't think you can make the case that, well, it's in our national interest, because we're not really in jeopardy here.
And who's on top then if you take out?
Exactly. That is the dilemma that we particularly face in the Middle East. It's the devil that you know, or it's the devil that you don't know. It is. I think when we take a look at these situations that have occurred in the Middle East, in many, many ways, they've been very untraditional in terms of the type of conflicts and engagements this country has been involved in. And it stymies us in terms of the best way to act. I think there's a lot of caution because we've taken a look at what's happened in Egypt. Can we afford to have Egypt and Syria both engaged in a civil war, and at least one of them with chemical weapons and who knows what else?
And you really have to be careful if you're the president, because you said within the past year that the war on terror has to end. He's on record as saying that, and now he's contemplating action that could, as you said, Denise, lead to a backlash where Syria not only lashes out at its own people again, but other countries.
All right, next topic. Lots of stories in state media this week about Scott Walker seeming to back away from his campaign promise to create 250,000 jobs in his first term as governor. Not true, says the governor. That is still his goal, and he will continue to try to create the economic environment so that it will happen. Since he took office, about 85,000 new jobs have been added to the Wisconsin employment numbers, which is only about 1/3 of his stated goal. Is that still an impressive number, or is it a failure?
Well, I guess if you put it in the context of the stagnation in the national economy, it's fair. If he had been halfway there at this point, I think he might be able to make a stronger case that he would get closer to the goal by the end of his first term. That being said, I still think it's going to be the mantra of the opposition to him in the next election that he did not reach his goal. And that still, I don't think, will be a strong enough, a compelling enough reason for people to deny him a second term. It's tough to try to build 200,000 jobs in a year. That clearly won't happen. Another 50,000 jobs that will be doable. And I think that's where his administration is really going to push hard to get him to that 60-65% mark so that he can say with some credibility that he's closer to the mark than further away from it.
If he's at $100,000, how can you rip a guy for creating 100,000 jobs? Isn't that what he's going to say? You know, okay, I didn't reach my goal, but I helped create 100,000 jobs.
But what was the goal based on? I mean, he made it up out of thin air. He had no plan. And in fact, the things he's done, and here's where I think he really gets nailed. Things he has done have prevented us from reaching that goal. He made up the goal to start with. He planned on Barack Obama saving him. He planned on a faster recovery nationally that then he could take credit for in this state. But instead, this state has fallen behind the national recovery. Job creation here is among the worst in the country, and part of it is his specific policies. His policies of putting the $3.6 billion budget deficit on the backs of working people, laying off teachers, laying off police officers, laying off firefighters, cutting aid to cities and counties all over this state, cutting historic cuts in education all over this state that ended up cutting wages and cutting jobs. And he's cut his own jobs so that he could give tax cuts, 2/3 of which go to the wealthy, not the working people who are the ones losing those jobs. So it is a failed policy that somehow it doesn't matter if people all over this state have less money in their pockets, are out of work, and can't buy goods and services. That's what builds an economy, is money going into the economy because people are buying goods and services. And if you're out of work, or if you're laid off as a teacher, you can't buy goods and services. So it's his policies that are holding the state back, and he should be nailed on it. Besides the fact, his only job creation plan so far has been to ruin the environment of northern Wisconsin with a mining bill, and send hundreds of millions of dollars to companies saying, okay, do you have enough money now? Would you now please create some jobs? And apparently not.
If it was a Democratic governor, would we have had 80,000 new jobs at this point in time, or more or less, or what?
I think there would have been the same struggle to reach a certain plateau because a lot depends on the national economy.
Except we're falling behind the national
Well, our
economy.
unemployment rate is under 7%. The national unemployment rate is above above 8%. I think there's no penalty. There shouldn't be any. There shouldn't be any penalty for setting the bar high. If you're a C student, don't you want to be an A or B student? I think the voters will have to decide when it comes time for re-election whether or not what he is doing is correct. Because I would hope that the notions of job creation and economic growth are nonpartisan. There should be no disagreement there. We all want our citizenry to do well.
Why do Republicans vote against job creation
economically? Where there can be disagreement, should be, and I fully understand that, is on how to get there, how to get to a certain job creation number, how to get more economic growth. There can be all disagreement, but I think that if you listen to people, CEOs of companies, small business owners, all the surveys indicate that there has been a turnaround since this governor took office. There seems to be more confidence in what he is doing, that the state is headed in the right direction and is on the right track. And that's what voters will have to decide, not whether or not we got 200,000 jobs or 250,000.
Or 8,000.
Is the state headed in the right direction under his policy?
You know, he couldn't be considered a failure, could he, if he's being talked about as a possible, seriously, if he's talked about as a possible presidential candidate, you couldn't say, oh, he's been a complete failure.
I'm not sure who's talking about him as a possible presidential candidate. With all due respect to anybody who's ever run for president, usually they're the ones who are pushing the idea of them running for president. But let's be really clear about what was said. It wasn't a goal when the governor was running before he was elected. It was his promise that we were going to have 250,000 jobs. It wasn't like, I'd like to kind of get there. It was a promise. So
like let's, a minimum.
Let's put it in that context. The other thing you may remember is right around the time the governor was making that promise and that came out, many economists came forward and said 250,000 jobs. If you're coming out of the kind of recession that we were and you begin to have a normal recovery, 250,000 jobs is something that would certainly be very obtainable. They did not see it as a stretch. The problem is there's been a disconnect between whatever's happening in the rest of the country in job creation, because we are seeing other parts of the country do better than we are in creating these jobs, and what has happened here in Wisconsin. And I think it is clear that some of the things that the governor's done have had a less than positive impact on job creation. It's not just less aid to local government that has created fewer jobs. It has. It's also the other changes in Act 10 that have taken more money out of people's pockets, so they have less money to spend to buy goods and services that really help to create jobs. And I do think that people will expect to revisit and see what happened. What happened to this promise of 250,000 jobs? I mean, I would be thrilled. I want to see people in Wisconsin fully employed. I would be thrilled if we were able to hit that 250,000 job mark. But if we don't hit it, I think that citizens have every right to say, what happened to this promise?
There are three industries that if they rebound, the governor will come close to his mark. The real estate industry, which has been fits and starts over the last 3 years. The other will be the service economy. And if that picks up, you'll see people who currently are spending more of their disposable income on entertainment, for example. That will lift job creation. And then the new technologies markets. If they bring a lot of this technology that they're currently investing in to market to create jobs, for example, the engineering schools at Madison and UW Milwaukee, that technology, if that starts to get into the marketplace, you'll see.
I would add a fourth, manufacturing.
But the only thing I would say is, I don't necessarily disagree with you, but what is on the horizon in any one of those areas that tells us we're headed in that direction? We've actually seen property values decrease in the state of Wisconsin. We have seen not the same margin of growth in the service industry that we've seen in other parts of the country.
And those are low-wage jobs besides.
And we haven't seen this kick up and uptick in new technology. So I agree with you. I just don't see anything on the horizon that's going to let those things happen.
All right, let's spend the last few minutes talking about Harley Fest. Tens of thousands of bikers from all over the world are in Milwaukee this weekend for Harley Davidson's 110th birthday celebration. 2 questions. Is this all just great for Milwaukee? Are there any negatives? And secondly, how in the world does one brand of anything generate such a loyal and devout following? I mean, if you were teaching business school, how would you do this? How did they do it?
It is cool. Yeah, well, I grew up in a small town in Indiana, and imagining getting out of there, you know, I thought romantic things were like trains or something, or just, you know, if I could get in a car and get out of this damn little town and actually see the world. And here, converging on Milwaukee, are these people from really all over the world, and they're people that do live, you know, their dream. They're people who roam free. And all of us working schmucks, you know, are you know, we're not going anywhere, right? And you know, there's something really cool about that. It's also, they look like they've had a hard life too. So we know we don't necessarily want to go on the road, but we like the idea of going on the road.
How has the company been able to do it?
A little bit of mystique and a whole lot of hard work. You got to keep in mind that there were several times going back through its history when the company almost went belly up. And it was just dogged determination that kept it alive, and a lot of sacrifice from employees, from the ownership, utilizing new structures to manage the company, new ways to build the product, new ideas for product. All those things, I think, mattered. And the sacrifices that this community made to invest in the company to keep it alive too. Think about that neighborhood around the factory that has had it's seen its better days. But there were several others, manufacturers that were around that area that also invested heavily so that could shore up that neighborhood and that plant.
It's a unique product.
It's sort of like the Packers, the brand loyalty and the history.
Well, 110 years, you must be doing something right. A unique product. It's high quality. It's in great demand. And like the Harley people say, if you have to ask, you really don't understand. And one of the beauties of it is this love affair, and it's the poor guy who's got maybe just a crummy job, but all the way up to CEOs of Forbes companies. Right. So it's a mixture of young, old men, and now even more so, a lot of women are riding.
A lot of women.
Yeah.
Do you see it continuing?
I do, but I mean, it's been, and Gerard was right, it's been hard work, but it is a story of incredible brand development, management, and a real strategy and devotion to developing and building the brand. It is the quality, without a doubt. It's an incredible quality product. But I think if we go back and take a look at when Harley almost went under, what was one of the key things that it talked about and promoted? It was made in the USA. Right. And it built on that brand with the rugged individuality of Americans. And I think that brand management and feeding and nurturing is why we're celebrating the 110th
I thank them for coming, and to the whiners that don't like the noise, get over it.
All right. All right, let's turn back to Syria for just a minute. If the news reports are right, we may be only days or even hours away from launching some kind of attack on the Assad regime. Rick Horowitz has been trying to sort through all the conflicting arguments for and against a U.S. military response. He's still sorting. Rick.
I know. You turn to me for answers, for clear positions, no equivocating, no waffling. Not today, boys and girls, not today. We're talking Syria, the latest outrages in that war-ravaged country, and what, if anything, we're supposed to do about it, to change it, or to stop it, or to show we don't approve, or to show we don't back down, or... There's trepidation in the land, and more than that, there's uncertainty. For instance, we want Assad to lose, but do we want al-Qaeda to win? Those seem to be the current choices. For instance, maybe the two Johns should have a sit-down and sort things out. Here's John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, who questions whether attacking Syria has anything to do with America's strategic interests. Whatever the president does, especially if he doesn't come to Congress first, will be too much for John Boehner. And here's John McCain, the former Navy pilot, who's never met a crisis that he didn't think would be improved by putting American planes in the air and maybe some American bombs on the ground. Whatever the president does won't be enough for John McCain. But it's not just Republicans in disarray. There are plenty of Democrats, too. They're less likely to take to the talk shows to call the president a warmonger or a wimp, but they're not sure either. They're remembering Iraq and a false road to war. And you have to wonder if we'd be this close to another war if it weren't for the videos. 100,000 Syrians had already been killed, not by nerve gas, but still, before we ever saw those awful videos. But can you look away? Can you do nothing once you've seen them? Well, India's doing nothing. Brazil is doing nothing. Russia and China, of course, are doing nothing. Even Great Britain. Great Britain, who's been Lindsey Graham to our McCain, our comrade in arms, our wingman, ready to follow us into any adventure, no matter how ill-advised. Great Britain says they'll sit this one out. They also remember Iraq. So we may be going it alone to stand up for international norms, we say. But not just that, we say, to protect our credibility. And so you have to wonder if we'd be in this position if the president had never uttered the words red line. Sorry, no easy answers today.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.